There is a moment most people never talk about. Not the punch, not the words, not even the silence that came after. It is the moment you walked into a room and felt the air change, the way a group of eyes moved, not all at once, but one by one, like a slow tide turning against you. You felt it before anything was said. Something in your chest tightened, something old and animal, the part of you that has always known when you are not safe. You were maybe 10 years old, maybe 14. Maybe if this is the kind of wound that never fully closes, you were 23 and standing in a break room at work while someone laughed at something you said, and the whole room went quiet, and you smiled like it didn't land anywhere tender. That feeling, that exact feeling, that is where this begins. Not with definitions, not with statistics, not with a diagram explaining social hierarchies and adolescent peer groups. Just that moment, the tightening, the held breath, the quiet decision to make yourself smaller than you already were. You know this feeling. And somewhere, even if you never say it out loud, you also know that the person who made you feel it was carrying something too. That does not make it okay. Nothing about this will try to make it okay. But understanding it, really understanding it from the inside out, that might give you something you have been searching for without knowing you were searching. A way to stop carrying what was never yours to begin with? Think about the person who targeted you. Or if that word is too heavy right now, think about the one who always had a comment. The one who made the jokes that had just enough edge to draw blood. The one who could make a whole room tilt with just a look. The one who seemed, at the time, like the most powerful person in every space they entered. You probably spent a long time trying to figure out what you did wrong. That is the first thing the mind does. It turns inward, looking for the flaw, the mistake, the reason. Maybe you were too quiet, too sensitive, too different, too visible in the wrong way. You rehearsed conversations in your head. You changed how you dressed, how you walked, how loud you laughed. You shrank. Deliberately. Strategically. Because if you could just make yourself the right size, maybe you would stop being a target. And the strange thing is, even now, years later, there might still be a version of that reflex inside you. You walk into a room and you assess it first. You read the energy before you speak. You notice who holds the most social weight, and you position yourself, carefully, without even thinking about it, so as not to be caught in the crosshairs. That is not paranoia. That is not weakness. That is a nervous system that learned to stay alive. But here is what nobody told you about the person on the other side of that equation. The one who seemed so certain. The one who never appeared to doubt themselves for a single second. The one who had the whole room and knew it. They were the most afraid person in the space. Here is something worth sitting with slowly. Bullying is almost never about power. It is about the terror of powerlessness. And the body, the human body, and the human mind will do extraordinary things to avoid feeling powerless. Think about what it looks like from the inside. Not from your side, but from theirs. A child, because it almost always starts in childhood, who grew up in an environment where control was unpredictable, where love was conditional, where approval could be withdrawn at any moment for reasons that did not make sense, where the person who was supposed to be safe was also the source of the danger. That child learns something very quickly, something that gets written into the nervous system like code. The lesson is this: if you are the one doing the hurting, you cannot be the one getting hurt. Psychologists call this externalizing behavior, the pattern of projecting inner pain outward rather than processing it inward. But before it has a name, it is just a child who discovered that when they made someone else feel small, the unbearable feeling inside their own chest quieted down for a little while. And the brain, which is always looking for patterns, filed that away. It worked. Do it again. This is not an excuse. Sit with that clearly. This is a map. A map of how someone who was once hurt learned to become the source of hurt for someone else, and how that cycle, if no one interrupts it, just keeps turning. The cruelty you experienced was not a verdict on your worth. It was the overflow of someone else's unprocessed pain looking for somewhere to go. Take a breath here, just for a moment. Let that last sentence sit before you move forward, because the next part asks you to go somewhere a little harder, The consequences of being on the receiving end of this kind of behavior do not end when the behavior ends. That is the thing nobody explains clearly enough. The body keeps the score, which is a phrase that has become almost too familiar to still land with weight, but let it land again now. Your nervous system recorded those experiences, not as memories exactly, but as truth, as the way the world works, as evidence about who you are. And here is where it gets quietly devastating. The person who bullied you probably moved on. Maybe they do not even remember your name. But inside you, without your permission, something shifted. The way you relate to authority, the way you respond to conflict, the way you instinctively read the room before you allow yourself to relax, the way you sometimes brace for impact in a conversation that is going perfectly well, because some part of you still does not believe that something going well is allowed to last. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, the nervous system set to a permanent low-grade alarm. But before it has a name, it is just you, standing at a party, laughing at the right times, saying the right things, and feeling, underneath all of it, fundamentally alone in a way you cannot fully explain. There is also something that happens to identity. When you are repeatedly told, through words or exclusion or casual cruelty, that you are less than, something in the developing mind starts to believe it, not consciously, not in a way you could point to and say, yes, that is the exact moment I decided I was not enough. It happens in the accumulation, the death of 1,000 small cuts. And one of the cruelest twists is this: the wound often shapes you into someone exceptional, someone deeply empathetic, highly perceptive, extraordinarily attuned to other people's emotions because you had to be. Survival made you sensitive in ways that become your greatest strengths as an adult, but those same strengths sit right next to the wound. You cannot fully separate them. What saved you then is also what makes certain things harder now. Here is the part that does not get said enough. Some of the people reading this right now were not just the ones who were targeted. Some of you were also the ones doing the targeting. Or you stood in the middle, watching and said nothing. Or you laughed because the alternative felt too dangerous. Or you were kind to someone's face and cruel when they were not in the room. This is not a judgment. This is just the truth of how it works. Because the psychology of bullying behavior is not only about the bully and the victim as fixed roles. It is about the social ecosystem, the group, the silence, the complicity, the hierarchy that everyone inside it was trying to survive in their own way. The bystander who said nothing was also afraid. The one who laughed along was also protecting themselves. The whole structure was held up by fear, everyone playing the role that kept them safest within it. If you were ever on the side of causing harm, even if you told yourself it was minor, even if you have carried that quietly for years without knowing exactly what to do with it, there is something in this too for you. I learned to perform confidence long before I ever felt it. That is the emotional center of what gets transmitted from one generation to the next, from one broken home to one school hallway to one adult workplace. Performance. The performance of control. The performance of power. The performance of not caring, when caring is actually the thing that feels most dangerous. Because here is the paradox at the heart of bullying behavior. The cruelest versions of it come from people who feel the most deeply. Not in a sentimental way. In a raw, unregulated, terrifying way. Feeling too much, with no tools to process it, with no safe person to hold it with, becomes a kind of pressure that has to go somewhere. And it goes outward. It goes toward the person who seems, in that moment, like the safest target, the one who will absorb it and not fight back, the one who reminds them, at some unconscious level, of the part of themselves they cannot stand to look at. Psychologists sometimes call this projective identification. The person externalizes onto you the parts of themselves they most despise, their own vulnerability, their own softness, their own fear, and then attacks those qualities in you. They are not actually attacking you. They are attacking themselves, and you happen to be the surface they were using. You were never the point. You were the mirror. Let that sit for a moment. You were the mirror. The turn is here, and it is not triumphant. It does not arrive with a swell of music. It arrives quietly, the way most real things do. The question is not, how do you forgive the person who hurt you? That framing puts the weight back on you, makes healing contingent on a performance of grace you may not be ready for, and may never need to give. Forgiveness is one path. It is not the only one. It is not even the most important one. The more useful question is, what are you still carrying that actually belongs to them? Because some of what lives inside you now, the voice that says you are too much, the reflex that makes you apologize for taking up space, the low-level hum of not enoughness that colors certain days, some of that was handed to you. It was not yours originally. It was installed by someone who was themselves carrying something they had been handed. This is what shadow work, in the psychological tradition of Carl Jung, asks you to look at. Not the darkness in other people, but the parts of yourself that were pushed underground because they were not safe to show. The anger you never allowed yourself to feel. The grief you covered with performance. The need you learned to call weakness. Those parts did not disappear. They went somewhere internal, and they have been shaping your choices from the basement, quietly, without your consent. The work, and it is work, not a moment of insight, not a single breakthrough, but slow and unglamorous work, is to go down there, to meet those parts, to realize that the child who was told they were too sensitive was actually showing the full range of their humanity, and that humanity is not a flaw to be corrected. Your inner child, that early version of you who first learned to make themselves small, is still there. They are still waiting to be told something different from what they heard in that hallway, in that classroom, at that lunch table where no one moved over to make room. What they need is not to be rescued. They need to be accompanied, to hear from the adult version of you who made it through something true and steady. You did not deserve it. It was not about you. You are still here. There is nothing wrong with the version of me they tried to break. There is a kind of grief that belongs to this, a grief that often goes unnamed because it does not look like grief from the outside. It looks like anger, or distance, or a dry sense of humor about things that were not funny. It looks like the inability to stay fully present when someone is kind to you, because kindness still feels like a trap that has not sprung yet. That grief is for the version of yourself that might have been if the environment had been different. The confidence that was never allowed to develop uninterrupted. The openness that closed before it had a chance to see what it could become. The years spent trying to be someone who would not be targeted, instead of simply being who you were. That grief is real. It deserves to be acknowledged, not performed, not rushed through, just acknowledged. And alongside the grief, and this is the part that takes the longest to arrive, there is often something else, something harder to name. A quiet, complicated gratitude for the resilience that hardship built. Not gratitude toward the person who hurt you. Not gratitude for the pain itself, but a recognition that the person you became, the depth of your empathy, the precision of your emotional intelligence, the way you notice what others miss, that person was also shaped by what you survived. You did not need to suffer to become that person. It is worth saying clearly, you did not earn your depth through your pain. You were always someone with that capacity, but you used it. Even when everything was trying to close you down, you remained open enough to feel, to notice, to understand. That is not nothing. That is extraordinary. The room I used to shrink inside has no power over the size of who I've become, and now, the ending. Which is not really an ending. Because the truth about this kind of psychology, the truth about the long shadow that early cruelty casts, and the long work of understanding it, is that it does not resolve on a timeline. It does not have a final chapter. What it has is layers. You understand something today, and 6 months from now, in a completely different context, in an argument with someone you love, or a moment of inexplicable sadness on a Tuesday afternoon, you will understand it differently, more fully, more gently. That is not failure. That is what healing actually looks like, not a straight line, a spiral. You pass the same places again and again, but each time from a slightly higher vantage point. The person who hurt you was not a monster. They were a person who was broken in ways they did not choose, doing something that served a function they did not understand, causing harm they may or may not have been aware of. and you were not a victim in the fixed, permanent sense of the word. You were a person to whom something harmful happened, who survived it, who carried it longer than you should have had to, and who is now, maybe for the first time, setting it down somewhere and looking at it clearly. There are people in the world right now who are still inside the system that hurt you. Young people in hallways who are learning the same lessons you learned. The one who is being told they are too much. The one who is learning to perform cruelty because it feels safer than showing softness. The bystander who is choosing silence because the cost of speaking feels too high. The cycle does not break because someone decides to stop being mean. It breaks because someone, somewhere, finally receives something different. A moment of being seen. A voice that says, quietly and without spectacle, this is not how it has to be. You cannot undo the past. But you can be that voice, not with a speech, not with a declaration, just by refusing in your own life, in your own relationships, in the way you treat the most vulnerable version of yourself, to pass the wound on. That is the quiet revolution. It does not look like anything from the outside. It looks like a person walking into a room and taking up exactly the amount of space they deserve. It looks like a person choosing not to rehearse an apology for existing. It looks like someone letting kindness land without waiting for it to become something dangerous. Maybe healing is not the absence of the wound. Maybe it is learning to live beyond the reach of what it once told you about yourself. The hallway is behind you now. It has always been behind you, even when it felt like you were still standing in it. The air in this room is different. There is no one arranging themselves against you. There is no social current to read, no hierarchy to survive. There is just this, you, here, now, thinking about something that mattered enough to follow you all this way, and the quiet, unhurried possibility that understanding it might finally let you put it down. Not forever, not perfectly, just for now. And sometimes, just for now is enough.